My friends are the characters who I form bonds with. My love belongs to words on a page that tell me that I'm not alone. In the moment of darkness, I return to the books and remember the 7-year-old girl who believed in fairies, magic, and the world beyond her. Perhaps this is why we read. Stories give us permission to live outside of ourselves and just maybe travel without having to move our feet.
Okay, so I know it's no longer Valentine's Day and I'm a little bit behind, but I wanted the Valentine's Day video to be book-based because the only boyfriend I have in my life is fictional, so I need to show them some love. So just, if you've seen To All the Boys I've Loved Before, you'd know that Lara Jean, the main character, writes 5 letters to 5 different guys. And instead of guys, I've chosen 5 different books that I want to dedicate Love Season to, even if it's a bit late. So the first book I have is The Cruel Prince, and if you were on Book Talk, I imagine that you've heard so much about this book, and there's a reason why it's hyped up. This is the book that got me back into reading. I was reading a bit before I read this, but I did kind of take a massive hit because of school. I don't know about you, but when I have school, I really struggle to read. And the reason this got me back into reading is because it happened. I read this during the first lockdown. So I had no school, it was all online, and I just remember the feeling I experienced when I first read this because it's been such a long time since I read fantasy books. At that point, I was into classic literature and like psychological thrillers, which are great, but this reminded me of why I loved the whimsical magical world, and I'm so happy I read this book. It ignited my passion for reading, and I remember I just have this memory of tearing through this book. It's a trilogy, and I just tore through it in like a week because I had to wait for shipping because lockdown, I couldn't physically go to the shops and get the book. But Cruel Prince, my first love, and if you know anything about first loves, you never truly get over them. This book follows our main character Jude, who starts off as a 7-year-old girl in the human world, like our world, normal life, whatever. She got her parents, it's all good. But then this creature called Maddox comes and he kills the family, essentially. It's not a spoiler, it's literally like the first few pages. So he kills her parents, and even though he's this monster, I guess he feels some sort of moral obligation to look after Jude and her sister. So he takes Jude and her sister to the Feywild where he's from. So the only person in the Feywild who's human is Jude. Naturally, she feels like an outcast. So that's kind of the beginning, and then we kind of skip to 10 years later. Jude is a little bit older, she's 17. We really see her trying to blend in with the Feywild. She tries to emulate their behaviors and pretend that she's one of them, but she's not. She just deeply wants to fit in like any teenager wants to. The story really starts to kind of kick off and build when she gets thrown into the messy world of Fey politics and trickery whilst dealing with the Cruel Prince, Carden. And that's all I'm gonna say in terms of the plot, but this book is so good if you are trying to get into fantasy and you're a complete newbie. Holly Black, the author, she really breaks down the concept of the Feywild in a way that's quite simple, doesn't go in too deep with all the little specific lore, but she keeps it quite simple and straightforward for you to get a basic understanding of what the Feywild is like. It's very easy to understand, and my favorite out of the trilogy is the second one, The Wicked King. That book is so good. The second book I have is The Young Elites by Marie Lu. It's a beautiful anti-heroine story. It's fantasy as well. I love fantasy. I think all the books, apart from one, is fantasy. So you have this world, right? And I believe it's Italian Renaissance period. So the world is so beautiful, everything comes alive. The way Marie Lu describes the scenery, it's so beautiful and colorful. You really feel like you're getting into the culture. A plague outbreaks, right? And suddenly, the people who got the plague, even after they've recovered, they get this marking. For example, our main character, Adelina, she now has white hair and she wears an eye patch. and other people have their own markings. So people pretty much know who didn't get the infection, right? Who didn't get the plague. It mainly affected children. And these children who got the plague and have these very visible markings get shunned from society. They are kind of outcast, seen as disgusting, dirty, second-class citizens. So again, fast forward into Adelina's life after we get her childhood and the plague and what that was like for her. The story is mainly about her again trying to fit in, similar to Jude, but she can't fit in because people are disgusted of her. There's a lot of discrimination for people who have her marking, and again, she has white hair. It's very obvious that she got the plague. After trying to fit in with normal society, she runs away and she tries to fit in with the Dagger Society. What's interesting about this group of people is that they are teenagers, young adults who got the plague as a kid. So they all have their own marks, they have their own scarrings. And on top of that, people who got the plague also they develop this magical ability. Everyone has their own power. That's also why they're kind of feared, because not only do they look strange, but they have this weird, unexplained supernatural ability. Our girl Adelina, she's in the Dagger Society. She's thinking, yes, this is gonna work out for me. I finally found my people. As she's learning about herself and finally being part of a community with people who are like her, she starts to take a dark path. And I guess you could say it's a story of vengeance and sisterhood. That's the main themes I got from this. While she starts out as somebody who just wants to fit in, we see that change. Like I said, it's an anti-heroine villain arc. And I love this book. I think the second book, The Rose Society, the last book, Midnight Star, broke my heart. I was crying. Luckily, again, it was during lockdown. I was in my room. It was fine. But I highly recommend people read this book. People hype up her other book, like her other series, Legend, which I also read and I loved, but this is 10 times better. And people need to talk about it more. Next book I have is Six of Crows. Again, if you're on Book Talk or any book-based platform, you've probably heard too much about this book. Actually, no such thing as too much. This book is fantastic and it deserves all the praise it gets. I don't care. It is quite long. I feel like these other books, they're like 300-ish pages. Yeah, they're like less than 400, whereas this one, I believe it's 500 or 600. Okay, it's just under 500 pages. So it is a lot thicker and there's a lot more to get through, but it's worth it. It took me a while to get into this book, I'm not gonna lie. This is the book that I don't think I've ever felt so connected to a group of characters before. Again, they're fictional, but we can still resonate. It's fine. I really loved how it doesn't feel like there's a main character, right? It's called Six of Crows. There's 6 main characters and it's multiple POV. If that's not something you're into, I would cast away your judgments and still check it out, because you do get a sense for each voice. You can tell who's speaking as who. Even sometimes when I wouldn't read the title of the POV, just from the first sentence, I'm like, oh, this is Kaz, this is Ined, because Lee Bardugo does such a good job of creating distinct voices and distinct characters with their own personalities. So you really do get to see the same situation from a different perspective, that it almost feels like you're reading a new story, which I thought was really cool, because I'm not somebody who has read multiple POV books. I think this is maybe the 3rd one I've read, and I really enjoyed that concept. This book is about a group of misfits. We have 6 characters and each of them come together to join on this heist. They've been given the chance to win a lot of money, but it's very dangerous and very risky. They each all have their own reasons for taking part in such a ridiculously dangerous scheme, but they have, I'm not gonna tell you what it is, but they have their own motivations and they're willing to come together to do it. This is not your happy-go-lucky type of story. I would also describe this as anti-hero. They're not heroes, but they're not exactly villains. They're Six Dangerous Outcasts. So again, it gives you a different spin on books. I feel like a lot of fantasy books tend to focus on the chosen one trope, or like the hero trope, but this book is really interesting because it's more on the darker side, and it's adult fantasy. So if you're trying to get out of YA, or you're trying to get into adult fantasy, this is I don't know if I'd start with this book, but it's a great adult fantasy book. If you're familiar with this book, you're probably familiar with Shadow and Bone, and they all take place in the same universe, the Grishaverse. But you don't have to read Shadow and Bone to understand this book. It does help a bit with the magic system, because not a lot is explained about the magic system in this book, because we have some continuing characters from the previous book that I mentioned. Just to break it down to make it a bit easier, there's different terminology for different types of magical abilities, which is where the fantasy element comes in. But not all the characters actually have these magical abilities, only a few of them do. And yeah, I loved it. Also, Shadow and Bone, the previous book I mentioned, is a TV show as well, and some of the characters are actually featured in here. People believe the TV show is like the prequel for this. So if you want to get an idea of what I'm talking about, I'll definitely check out the Netflix series. Does it have It doesn't really have spoilers, because like I said, it takes place before what happens here. It depends. If you don't mind having a few spoilers, I would watch the TV show and then read this book if you don't want to read Shadow and Bone. The next book I have the physical copy, but it's got a lot of water damage, so I'll put up a picture somewhere, and that is Pride and Prejudice. I read this book. Okay, so I love Keira Knightley, right? I love period dramas, I love all of that stuff. And if you don't know, Keira Knightley is like the period drama queen. And one day I was like, I'm gonna binge watch all of her movies. And of course I had to watch Pride and Prejudice. This was when I was like 13 or 14. So after I watched the movie, which I sort of understood, I understood it enough, I was like, yeah, I'm gonna read the book. I can read, this Jane Austen Old English style. So I picked it up from my school library, and I was like 14, and I DNF'd it real quick. I did not understand a thing. I couldn't even keep up with the characters. I didn't understand the concept of addressing someone as Mrs., Miss, and Miss, like Miss Bennet. I was so confused. So I did put it down. But then I told myself, when I had developed my English literature understanding, I would pick it up again, which is exactly what I did. So the second time I did manage to finish it, and at this point I had rewatched the movie so many times. I think I was about 16 or 17, so it did take me a couple of years. The angst, the yearning, the slow burn, everything can be traced to this book. Ever since I read this book, I have been obsessed with enemies to lovers. That's where it originated for me, right? I don't know about other people, where it came from for them, but for me, it was Pride and Prejudice. Elizabeth Bennet is the daughter of a countryman with I think she has 5 or 4. She has a few other sisters, and all of them, I guess during that time, their main mission was to get married. Elizabeth is the original, I'm not like other girls. She's not fussed about marriage. Well, not marriage for convenience. She's all about marriage for love, and she wants to take her time with it. But back then, the moment you hit 18, if you're not married, you're basically like a grandma. So there is a bit of pressure for her to get married. Then we meet Mr. Darcy. He's a landowner, he's a gentleman, but he doesn't have the best reputation in terms of his temperament and character. They meet under circumstances that I'm not going to get into. They must overcome their own prejudices and pride in order to come together, and it's the sweetest story. I can never get tired of it. Honestly, I love it. And the final book I am dedicating this video to is Legendborn by Tracy Deonn. I still remember the first time I read this. It did take me a while to get into, I'm not gonna lie. There's a lot of info dumping for like the first 30% of the book, because there's so much in terms of the world building. Like, Tracy Deonn goes in deep. She does not miss a single detail, and it can get quite complicated at first. So just get through the first 100 pages. I know that sounds like a lot, but once you get through that stage, this book will just hook you right in. That's exactly what it did to me. It took me like a week to get through those initial first few 100 pages, but once I did, 2-3 days, I was finished. This book is about Bree Matthews, who's a 16-year-old African-American student who enters this early college thing. I don't know if this is an actual thing. She's in university, college, whatever, but because she's under 18 but incredibly intelligent, her and her best friend enter early college, which is kind of like pre-college. I don't really know how to describe it. Okay, she's in an institution full of people older than her. Okay, yeah, it says here it's a residential program for bright high schoolers at this uni. So yeah, that's great. And this is not a spoiler, but her mom passes away. That's part of the reason why she's so desperate to start a new school life and get away from her childhood and the trauma that came with losing her mom. So she's using this as a place to escape and to just put the grief past behind her, like any teenager would. And things seem to be going well. She has a few instances in terms of racism and trying to adjust into this new school life. But things take a dark turn when she witnesses a magical attack on campus. Because she's not supposed to see it, right? The person who did this magical attack tries to wipe her, like he does this thing where he is supposed to erase her memory, except it doesn't work on her. So he's like, what's going on? Why do you remember this attack? You're not supposed to. What are you? It turns out there's a secret society inside this campus, and somehow Bree is connected to it. And that's honestly the most fascinating part of this book, is that cult-like secret society. So it's a modern day Arthurian, I don't know how to say it, like King Arthur based fantasy book. So it takes a lot of its lore from there. You have the round table with the knights, and you have the Excalibur, you know, if you know King Arthur, it has those elements in it, which I think was really interesting to base your magic system on that. And Tracy Dion did this really interesting thing where she combined this historically white racist society, as in hidden society, and linked it to Black trauma, I guess specifically African American trauma, slavery, and how the magic system of this white institution has benefited from the magic system that originally belonged to these African Americans who were enslaved. She did such a good job of taking these really complex and difficult topics and breaking them down in a way that made sense, that both fit the world in a fictional book but also felt realistic enough to be applied to the world around us. This is the first book I've read where the main character is a Black woman, and it's just, I can't express just how amazing it was to read that. I don't need a book to be about Black people or people who align with my identity for me to read it. Like, most of the books I've read are unfortunately white, but I am expanding that. But again, it was really nice to see that even the little details that I had never really read about in another book for the protagonist, her hair, like there's this attack with the secret society in the demon world, and some of the demon juice or whatever, I don't know, gets on her hair, and Bree's trying to figure out, oh, how can I deep condition, how can I wash, how can I sort this out before class, and she's like trying to calculate the most time efficient way to clean her hair, wash her hair without damaging it. And things like she was staying over this person's house and she realized she left her bonnet and there's no silk or satin pillowcase, and just things like that. Like, I've never felt so seen in a book, and that's part of the reason why I adore this book. But the second book has come out. I have it and I plan on reading it this month. So hopefully I finish it before February ends. So I've got about a week, or yeah, I've literally got like a week. So yeah, thank you so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed this video and that you check out some of these books if you haven't. And if you have, please let me know your thoughts on these books, and let me know which 5 books would you dedicate love letters to. Bye bye.